Hey guys, it's Chris and welcome back to another Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire theory/speculation video. And this time I want to talk about a character in our story that's pretty damn mysterious, and I think the implications are pretty damn important, and not to mention it's kind of a parallel to the whole damn Ice and Fire thing. Anyway, who the hell is Craster and how is his story important?
Dracarys.
Alright, so we know Craster's a rather minor character in the story, but he also seems to be very important to the whole entire story, and also parallels the whole Ice and Fire thing anyway. If you think about the Night King being ice, and Dany being fire, and Jon being both, Craster is a very similar character as far as a parallel goes, because technically Craster is a wildling, although he's pretty much neutral in the war between the Crows and the Wildlings, but all the Wildlings hate him. At the same time, all the Night's Watch hates him, but they use him because he has a keep north of the wall where they can stop by, get some food and some rest and some warmth on the way out on their rangings. But of course the important thing here with Craster is that he actually gives his sons up to become White Walkers. He says he's right with the gods. So what does that really mean? And what do we know about Craster himself? All we really know in the books is that he's an older man, probably coming towards the end of his life. It's indicated that he's probably in his 50s or 60s perhaps, because he is described as a man with gray hair turning white, with a flat nose, a drooping mouth, and in the books he's actually missing an ear as well due to the cold. And of course we know Craster is killed by the mutineers of the Night's Watch, specifically by Dirk. So what do we know about Craster? First of all, we know that he is a son of a Night's Watch ranger and a wildling woman from the village of Whitetree, and we get that information through various sources in the books. We get that from Ygritte, we get that from Jon's perspective, as well as Dolorous Ed, and Ed even says that he has black blood running through his veins. Now the term black blood is used in various places in the books, and that's a whole different conversation. But the point being here that I think Ed refers to him being a Crow, as in the Black Brothers, Black Blood, since apparently he is the son of a Night's Watch Ranger. But Craster himself is kind of an enigma north of the wall, because he is not hostile towards the Night's Watch, although technically he is a wildling, but he's also hated by both sides, but nobody touches him, nobody bothers him. They basically just leave him alone, apparently because he's right with the gods. That seems to imply that he has some kind of pact with the White Walkers, not only to give up his sons to create new White Walkers, but perhaps some sort of protection as well. So again, it's kind of a parallel with the whole entire story with the Ice and Fire thing. He's kind of a neutral character, although he's a hated character, and nobody from either side fucks with him, although they all seem to hate him. Also, Craster's story seems to parallel the original Night's King story, and for you show-only watchers, of course, the Night's King story is the story of the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who apparently fell in love with another woman and made her his queen, and they ruled at the Night Fort for 13 years before being overthrown by the Night's Watch, the Starks of Winterfell, as well as the King Beyond the Wall, Jormund, at the time, where they all teamed up and overthrew this Night's King. And apparently he did something very similar to Craster, and that was sacrificing children to the others through the Black Gate at the Night Fort, which is one of many castles that run along the wall, and specifically that's how Bran got north of the wall on his hunt for the Three-Eyed Crow, and that's also the same location that Sam and Gilly passed through when they were going south of the wall, as they ran from the White Walker after Sam killed one, as they headed south to get back to Castle Black. So one of the questions I've always had about Craster is how in the hell did he come up with this pact in the first place with the others? Apparently some kind of agreement had to be reached, whether it was verbal or non-verbal, but the point being that at some point he figured out that if he gave away his male sons, that the White Walkers would leave him alone and perhaps even protect him, which may explain why no wildlings go after him in the first place, because the wildlings know that he does help the Night's Watch, and they have basically been mortal enemies for thousands of years. So it makes you wonder, with all the blood ties in A Song of Ice and Fire and George R. Martin's story writing as far as Jon Snow, RLJ, Secret Targaryens, and all the other important DNA aspects of the story, it makes you wonder about his parents, who they really were, and who Craster really is, and does that really matter as far as his ability to make a pact with the White Walkers and give up his sons and marry his own sisters for that matter to keep having more, to keep the bloodlines pure. Very similar parallel to the Targaryens, who actually kept the bloodlines pure by intermarrying in the family, and of course that caused a lot of madness, but they saw it as a way of keeping their dragon genes in check, and I think back long ago that was more of dragon bonding as opposed to just the Valyrian look as far as the purple eyes and the silver hair. So my thought here is that Craster has to probably have some kind of important lineage here, and that may actually be Stark or Targaryen blood. Perhaps that's the only reason that the White Walkers need him, and that's the reason he was able to form a pact in the first place, because perhaps, just like the Night King himself that we saw be created in Season 6 by Bran via vision, perhaps that's why they need Craster, and that's the only type of children that can be converted to White Walkers. So that would indicate that he perhaps is a Stark or a Targaryen as far as bloodlines go. I know, I'm not saying that everybody in the story is a secret Targaryen or a secret Stark. I'm not even saying I believe what I'm talking about right here, but it seems to indicate that it is important, and it is pretty vague about who his parents are, so that seems to indicate that there may be some importance to who Craster actually is and who his parents actually were. So Craster has ties to both wildlings through his mother and crows or Night's Watch members through his supposed father, who is a ranger, and there is a saying in the north, the others take you, which is basically a northern way of saying go to hell, but wonder where that saying came from. It seems to indicate that some northerners in some way, shape, or form know of or remember or just got passed down that saying because people actually did sacrifice children to the others, perhaps for thousands of years. So does all that indicate that perhaps Craster has Stark blood or perhaps Targaryen blood, which again is Valyrian blood when we're talking about Targaryen/King's blood? And if you watch any videos on this channel, you know that I believe that the Night King was originally a Stark, or technically a Proto-Stark, since he was created long before House Stark was ever an official house. But the point being here that I believe that the Night King was a Stark, and I believe that's how Jon ties into being the Song of Ice and Fire, being the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, being half Stark, half Targaryen. I believe that his connection has to be not only to the Targaryens and their side of the world, but also to the ice side of the world, which would be the Night King. So I definitely believe that's the case. And also, if you think about it, Benjen was also saved in the show, at least, as Cold Hands, and it remains to be seen whether we'll see a Cold Hands/Benjen in the books. George R. R. Martin did say that Cold Hands was not Benjen in the books, but he could be just straight up lying. But the point being here that Benjen was also saved by the children via Dragonglass in the heart, just like the Night King, and Benjen is a Stark. Why didn't they save the other members of his party? Probably because they couldn't, and Stark blood perhaps is required for that type of magic to save somebody or bring them back or turn them into a damn ice demon. So in our story, it's currently around 300 AC, 300 years after Aegon's conquest. Craster seems to be about 50 to 60 years old, near the end of his life, and his father seems to be a Night's Watch Ranger, according to all the characters in the books, that took a woman from White Tree Village, north of the Wall, being a wildling. So the question is, around 50 or so years ago, were there any Starks or perhaps Targaryens at the Wall at the time? We do know that Starks have served throughout history on the Night's Watch. They were very close with the Night's Watch, and one of the last few houses to actually believe in what they do and believe it's honorable to serve there. But doing research, I could not find any particular Starks that served at the Wall at that time, although there likely were some, so that's certainly a possibility. It's just some random Stark or somebody with Stark blood, because we do know that a lot of northern houses do have Stark blood because of all the intermarriages throughout the centuries. So without any evidence of particular Stark serving at the Wall around that time, about 50 years ago or so, we do have one major event that happened around that time, and that was around 234 AC, I believe. And that was actually when Bloodraven, aka Brynden Rivers, was sent to the Wall by King Aegon V Targaryen, which used to be Egg from the Dunk and Egg novels, for killing Aenys Blackfyre, son of Daemon Blackfyre, during the Great Council of 233 AC, and therefore he was sent to the Wall to take the Black and became Lord Commander about 7 years later. So, Brynden Rivers, aka Bloodraven, aka the Three-Eyed Raven, with Aemon Targaryen, otherwise known as Maester Aemon, went to the Wall in the year 239 AC before disappearing on a ranging in 252 AC. So, around 50 or so years before the current time, we had Bloodraven at the Wall where he disappeared in a ranging beyond the Wall, and then of course later on we know that he found the Children of the Forest and became the next Three-Eyed Crow, the next Green Seer. So that's very interesting that at least at that time there was a Targaryen at the Wall who disappeared on a ranging going looking for the children, which seems to roughly fit around the time Craster would have been born, around 50 or 60 years ago. So that's certainly a possibility that he has Targaryen blood, and specifically if Bloodraven was his father, that would also make Craster have Stark blood as well, because Bloodraven's parents were Melissa Blackwood and Aegon IV Targaryen, and the Blackwoods all had Stark blood due to intermarrying in their houses. So that would give Craster a little bit of Stark blood, and not to mention in the books, Craster seems to know Starks when he sees them. He immediately recognizes Jon and says, "Who is this?" He kind of looks like a Stark, and some people actually believe that his name Craster is some variation of the word Stark or Karstark perhaps, so that may indicate who his father was as well. But the point being here that if Bloodraven was his father, he would have Stark and Targaryen blood flowing through his veins, and that may be something that's necessary for him to be sacrificing his children and making the pact with the others, as far as keeping him safe from other wildlings and the Night's Watch for that matter, because they do seem to protect him, because everybody hates him but nobody fucks with him. Now, another possibility would be Aemon Targaryen himself, Maester Aemon. Yeah, good old Maester Aemon at some point was a young man. Perhaps he went north of the wall one time on arranging with other people, being the Maester of the Night's Watch at the time. And perhaps he went a little bit rogue and fathered a child with a wildy woman, perhaps at White Tree. And we do know from the stories as well that Ygritte tells us in the books is that the mother of Craster actually went to the wall later on after he was born and wanted to show the Night's Watch member who the father was, that he did in fact have a son. But the Night's Watch blew their horns and ran her off, so whoever it was never knew they had a son, being Craster. And speaking of bloodlines, some people do believe that Craster is actually a descendant of the original Night's King and Night's Queen story that we talked about earlier. That would be very, very interesting, although I think that's a long, long time. But perhaps he is the long-lost offspring of that union, so to speak, and that would make him have actual other blood in his veins if they do have blood at all. But it is questionable how that magic works anyway, but that's very, very interesting. Now, what's really interesting that kind of backs that up as well is that in the books, Gilly's baby, which is now baby Sam, of course, was nicknamed Monster, and he's still at the wall in the books because there was a baby swap, and Gilly actually took Mance Rayder's child because Jon thought that Melisandre would want to burn that child due to having king's blood. Most people, including people in our story itself, believe that king's blood is simply king's blood and not Valyrian blood. We all know as book readers and show watchers that king's blood actually means Valyrian blood. So I think that's certainly interesting, although I don't necessarily think that's the case because it's literally been thousands of years, and why would somebody that's a descendant of the others come back and start sacrificing babies when it's been thousands of years since the original Night's King and Night Queen ruled at the Night Fort? So it's very, very interesting that George R.R. Martin leaves that to us to kind of figure out, or leaves it very, very vague as to in fact who his parents actually were and if it's really that important. In a nutshell, I do think that Craster's story and his backstory actually parallels the original Night's King story because he is sacrificing his sons to the White Walkers. So that's a very similar story, almost a modern day version of it. It seems to be implied that his parents are important, although it's pretty damn vague and we really don't know who that is and if that bloodline's important at all as far as Stark blood or Targaryen blood. And it is very, very interesting that around that time that Craster would have been born, that Bloodraven was actually at the wall, and perhaps that's when he disappeared ranging beyond the wall and he never got back to Castle Black, although the mother apparently thought he did. I'm not saying I necessarily believe this in any way, shape, or form. I don't think all roads lead back to Bloodraven, although I do think he's manipulating a lot of events in our story. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think it's a big possibility that there is something special about Craster, his lineage, and why he's able to make a deal with the others. Perhaps they're able to sense that type of bloodline without having any verbal communication. And something that reminds me of that is the scene at Hardhome, and that is the stare down between Jon and the Night King. After he sees Jon kill a White Walker with Valyrian steel, we see the stare down on the pier. He seems to know something about Jon, something seems familiar about him, so he seems to know either who he is or what he is, and that leads me to believe that Craster's blood is in fact important. So anyway guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. As usual, thank you for all the support, especially to you guys on Patreon, and a huge shout out to my executive Patreon smokescreen producers, Griffin, Volguy10, Lala Gig, Kissa Powell, Marc Joseph, aka the Snow in Winterfell, Marylin Bentley, JoAnna, Sean Hayes, Anonymous, Doc Holiday, Goska, HoonJive, and Kieran D20. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate all the support. And to everyone out there in YouTube land, I really appreciate the support. If you dig what I do here, please give this video a like and a share. Be sure to subscribe to get everything, and be sure to click that notification bell so you're notified when I drop a new damn video. So thanks for watching, you guys, and we'll see you